Welcome to the AI-generated UWS CCT's research podcast from the University of the West of Scotland, Creative Computing Technologies Research Group. Hey everyone! When we talk about virtual reality, or VR, we usually think about the visuals, right? The amazing sights, the sounds. But there's often something big missing from making it feel truly real. And that's, the sense of touch, haptics. And within haptics, one area that's really fascinating and pretty challenging is temperature.
That's exactly right. We're talking about thermal haptics. Basically, how do you make someone feel actual heat or cold inside a virtual world? And it's definitely not as simple as flipping a switch. To really get a handle on this, we're looking closely at a key piece of research today. The paper is called Thermal Haptic for Virtual Reality, a review. It's by Ning and Gilardi, who are researchers right here with us at the University of the West of Scotland.
Okay, so I know there's loads of research on haptics generally, but why this specific focus, a review just on thermal haptics for VR? What gap needed filling?
Well, that's a great question. While people have looked at the tech behind thermal feedback or haptics overall, there wasn't really a single comprehensive review that specifically gathered everything about how thermal haptics is being used and researched inside VR environments. So this paper really steps into that gap. Its main goal is to give a clear picture, kind of categorize the different methods and devices people are trying out for temperature in VR. You can think of it almost like a roadmap for VR designers and researchers. It shows the current landscape, what's possible, and maybe just as importantly, where the big challenges are.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, if you want total immersion leaving out temperature, it feels like a pretty big gap, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So why is adding that thermal layer so critical for realism?
Well, just think about your everyday life, right? You pick up a warm mug, you feel a cold breeze, you touch something that's been sitting in the sun. These feelings are really fundamental to how we understand the world around us, the objects in it. Temperature cues can even change how we perceive other things, like does something feel heavy or rough or even wet? If that's missing in VR, it can just instantly break the spell, The illusion shatters. The big challenge, though, is that how we feel temperature is super subjective. It depends on our own bodies, the environment. It's tricky to fake convincingly and consistently.
Right, it's not just hot or cold. It's subtle. It has to feel believable. And the authors of this review, they really dug into the existing research to figure this all out.
Oh, yeah. They were very thorough. They used a standard research approach, the PRISMA framework. Basically, it's a systematic way to find and filter research papers. They ended up selecting 66 key articles from different academic databases. So that gave them a really solid base to see what different approaches people are actually exploring.
Okay, so based on looking at those 66 papers, how did they break down the main ways people are trying to create temperature sensations in VR?
They identified 5 main categories based on how the thermal feeling gets delivered to the skin. You've got electric-based methods, fluid-based, radiation-based, chemically induced, and then something called trigeminal thermal illusions. And looking at the papers they reviewed, it's clear that electric and fluid-based methods are definitely the most common approaches being researched right now.
Okay, let's unpack those a bit then, starting with electric-based. What's the core idea there?
So this approach uses electricity, basically, to directly generate heat or cold. And the star player here, it showed up in nearly 2/3 of the electric method papers they looked at, is the Peltier element, or PE. These are small, solid-state chips, essentially. You run electricity through them one way, one side gets hot, the other gets cold, reverse the current, and they flip. The hot side cools down, the cold side heats up.
And because they're small, I guess you can put them into things people wear.
Exactly. You see researchers integrating them into all sorts of experimental VR gear, gloves, bracelets, even built into head-mounted displays, rings, ear devices too. The goal is to deliver really specific thermal dots to certain body parts to make the virtual world feel more real, especially when you combine it with other feedback like vibration.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting. You mentioned challenges earlier.
Mm-hmm.
If PEs are so common and seem versatile, what are the big hurdles? Why aren't we all feeling temperature in VR already?
Yes. The challenges, they are pretty significant, and the paper does a good job laying them out. So while PEs can both heat and cool, their cooling power is actually quite limited, that really strong cooling feeling. You often only get it properly for maybe a few seconds.
Only a few seconds, seriously.
Yeah, before the cold side starts warming up because it's absorbing heat from your skin or just the air around it. This makes trying to simulate, say, holding something cold for a while really, really difficult. Plus, they use a lot of power. That's a huge problem for VR headsets or gloves that aren't plugged into the wall.
Right, battery drain, always an issue.
Definitely. And then there are other problems too, like delays in how fast they respond, making them tricky to integrate smoothly into complex VR systems, and just issues with user comfort and making sure the feeling is consistent from person to person.
So getting the feeling to last long enough and making the tech practical for like a normal VR setup are the big engineering headaches.
Precisely. Researchers are trying all sorts of things to get around these limitations. Things like trying to predict where you'll move next to apply the heat or cold just in time, optimizing the circuits to use less power, or even using hybrid systems, maybe combining PEs with tiny fans to help dissipate heat better. There are also attempts to use cross-modal illusions,
Cross-modal illusions, what's that?
basically trying to use visuals to trick your brain. Like if you see ice, maybe a very brief cold sensation from the PE feels colder or lasts longer in your perception. But the paper is pretty clear that these are still major unsolved challenges for PEs.
Okay. And what about the other electric methods, joule heating and direct electric stimulation?
Right. Joule heating is simpler. It's just the heat you get when current flows through a resistor, like in a toaster wire, but much more controlled. It's good for quick bursts of localized heat and doesn't need much power for that. The upside is that fast heating. The downside, it only provides warmth, and cooling back down is slow, just passive, and it's hard to control precisely over bigger areas. Then there's direct electric stimulation, or DES. This involves putting tiny electrical currents directly onto the skin to stimulate the nerves. The potential here is that you might be able to deliver different kinds of feelings, thermal, maybe vibration, very quickly with one device. But controlling the intensity safely is obviously critical, and researchers have found it's particularly hard to create a believable feeling of warmth using DES. Cold seems easier to simulate that way.
Okay, interesting. So lots going on in the electric space, but with definite challenges. Let's shift gears then to the second big category, fluid-based stimulation. How does that work for temperature?
Right, so this uses a fluid, either a gas, usually air, or a liquid to transfer heat to or away from your skin. Gas-based systems often just use fans blowing air that's been heated or cooled. These are pretty popular in research because they're relatively cheap, easier to build into things like headsets or even room setups, and they give you a comfortable feeling because nothing's actually touching you.
Ah, okay, so like feeling a virtual breeze, hot or cold wind.
Exactly that. You see examples like systems designed to simulate weather, maybe with fans that can aim the airflow, or systems that blow targeted hot wind onto your face. Some researchers even use little puffs of air when you do something like teleport in VR. The big plus is that non-contact comfort.
But I'm guessing there are trade-offs. What are the downsides of using air?
Yeah, the main ones are spatial resolution and temperature stability. It's tough to aim a puff of air to create a very precise, tiny hot or cold spot. Air just tends to spread out. And keeping the air, especially cold air, at a really consistent temperature can also be hard. Plus, if you start combining fans with other things like PEs, the systems can get mechanically complicated, maybe noisy.
Okay. And what about using liquids instead of air?
Liquid-based systems usually circulate fluids, often water, maybe special oils through thin tubes or flexible pads that sit against the skin. Liquids are generally better at transferring heat than air, so potentially you can get more precise, localized temperature changes. People have experimented with devices worn on the arms or hands, or even much more ambitious setups like full-body suits with liquid channels.
Wow, a full-body suit. That sounds like it could be really effective, but maybe complicated.
Definitely complicated. You can actually get a reduced sense of temperature compared to something directly touching you, like a PE, if it's not designed right. Keeping the fluid flowing smoothly can be tricky, and it obviously limits how much the user can move around. Plus, you've got the whole issue of handling liquids, maintenance. It's just more complex than solid-state tech or simple fans. And getting that perfectly consistent feeling across different parts of the body while still being precise, that's a big engineering ask.
Yeah, sounds like it. So lots of engineering hurdles across both the big categories, electric and fluid. What about those other less common methods the paper mentioned? Radiation, chemical, trigeminal illusions. Give us a quick rundown.
Sure. Radiation-based usually means using infrared light to warm the skin. It's non-invasive, no contact needed. The main challenge there is controlling that beam precisely enough to hit a small target area. Air tends to scatter the infrared, making it inconsistent, and the tech for shaping the light beams spatially isn't quite there yet for high-resolution feedback.
Okay, and chemicals. That sounds a bit intense.
It is pretty direct, yeah. Chemically induced methods involve putting actual chemical agents on the skin, or sometimes even taken orally to simulate temperature in the mouth. Think things like capsaicin, the stuff that makes chili peppers hot for warmth, or menthol for a cooling sensation. In lab settings, it can be efficient, maybe cost effective, but the safety issues are huge. People have sensitivities, allergies.
Right.
And the risks with putting chemicals on skin for long periods make this pretty unsuitable for general VR
Yeah,
use.
definitely doesn't sound like something for your average home VR setup. Okay, last one. Trigeminal temperature illusions. That sounds very sci-fi.
It's pretty fascinating, actually. It focuses on stimulating a specific nerve, the trigeminal nerve, which handles a lot of sensation in your face. The idea is instead of actually heating or cooling the skin, you stimulate this nerve in a particular way to create the illusion of a temperature change. The big advantage, potentially less hardware needed right on your face. The downside, it's pretty much limited to the face area. And how well it works can vary a lot from person to person depending on their nerve sensitivity. It needs really careful calibration.
Okay, wow. So a whole range of different techniques, each with its own pros and significant cons, it seems. So bringing it all together, what does this mean for where we might actually use or experience thermal haptics in VR? According to the paper, what are the main application areas?
The review pulls out several key areas where researchers are actively applying these thermal techniques. A really big one is environmental simulation.
Like feeling the weather.
Exactly. Feeling the warm sun on your face on a virtual beach, the chilly wind if you're exploring a virtual mountain, simulating different weather conditions for, say, virtual tourism or nature experiences.
Yeah, that makes immediate sense, just adding that atmospheric realism.
Right. Then there's enhancing interaction with virtual materials and objects. Imagine actually feeling the warmth radiating from a virtual fireplace, or the coldness of a virtual ice cube, or noticing the temperature difference between touching virtual metal versus virtual wood. That temperature feedback can make objects feel much more solid and real and help you tell different materials apart just by touch.
That's a great point. Temperature is such a big clue for understanding what things are made of.
It really is. Now, another area, and this one's maybe less obvious, is using thermal haptics for emotional and social cues.
Emotional cues. How does that work?
Well, researchers are exploring things like simulating sensations linked to pain, maybe for training or specific experiences, or, get this, even trying to simulate the subtle feeling of warmth you might associate with someone looking at you, like feeling their gaze in a shared virtual space, adding a whole new layer to how we connect remotely.
Whoa. Using temperature for social presence. That's kind of wild. Didn't see that coming.
It really shows how deep these temperature sensations go, doesn't it? Education and training is another major application area. Think about simulating the heat coming off a chemical reaction in a virtual lab, or creating richer multisensory learning experiences, or in medical training, simulating tissue temperature during surgery practice, or improving awareness and training for hazardous jobs, like simulating intense heat for firefighter training. Makes drills way more realistic.
Yeah, bringing that realism to safety training where feeling the heat could actually save lives. That sounds incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. And related to that, there are potential medical applications too, like using thermal feedback in physical therapy to help patients regain sensitivity after injury or stroke. And then, of course, you have storytelling and gaming. Adding temperature changes can make interactive stories more engaging or really ramp up the immersion and psychological effect in games, especially something like a horror game. Imagine feeling a sudden cold spot.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely see that. It's amazing, really, how this one sense temperature, which we maybe take for granted, can be applied across such a huge range of VR experiences, from just, feeling a virtual cup to potentially critical training scenarios.
It really highlights the potential, doesn't it? And that's what makes this review so useful. It gathers all these different threads together, gives us that structured overview of the tech, the methods being tried, shows the sheer breadth of applications people are thinking about. And importantly, it also clearly lays out those big roadblocks. Researchers are still hitting the power issues, the response times, system complexity, getting the timing right with visuals, making it comfortable, making it work consistently for everyone.
Yeah, it sounds like a really essential read for anyone working in VR haptics. It maps out, like you said, where we are now, but also clearly flags where the big breakthroughs still need to happen.
Exactly. It shows the current state of the art and points towards where future innovation is needed most.
So, as VR keeps pushing forward, trying to blur that line between the virtual and the real by adding more senses,
Yeah.
thermal haptics is clearly a massive piece of that puzzle. Thinking about everything we've discussed, all the possibilities, but also all the challenges. Here's something for you, the listener, to think about. What virtual experience would you most want to feel the temperature of?
Or maybe, thinking about those technical hurdles, what everyday object that isn't VR related could you imagine benefiting first from having integrated thermal feedback? Where would feeling temperature be genuinely useful?
Lots to think about there. Thanks for tuning in to the AI-generated UWS CCT's research podcast from the University of the West of Scotland Creative Computing Technologies Research Group.